In this screencast, we'll take a look at how the ETH-GPI Link product from SKAARHOJ can be used to control a BlackMagic Multiviewer for monitoring for CCU operators. So let's assume we have a number of RCPs connected by their GPI output to an Ethernet-GPI link. In fact, you can do the same configuration for multi-camera controllers like these, where the array of buttons for camera selection will sort of do the same function. In fact, in the Ethernet GPI link box, we will configure the inputs like if they were buttons for a camera selector, like on the CCU. So we'll take a look at the configuration for the Ethernet GPI link. So as I said, the inputs, and we have 8 of them here, are set up so as long as they are held down, they'll put the camera number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth in memory group A. It means that if these triggers are held down simultaneously, these values will exist in the memory group at the same time, and then we hook it all up, and that's done with the controller element down here, with the BlackMagic Multiview memory group auto router. This is a feature, a pro feature for the BlackMagic Multiviewer device core from SKAARHOJ that allows us, or that will actually monitor the composition of the memory group. In other words, it will look for which cameras have their joystick held down. If we go back to the illustration here, it will look for which of these triggers are held down by pushing the joystick on the RCP, and in response to which joysticks are held down, it will then perform a routing on the multiviewer, and in the case only one camera is held down, it will show that source in solo mode. In case multiple are held down, it will show those sources in a 2x2 grid, and eventually it will fall back to whatever grid was there before. So the auto router is placed in the controller element of the Ethernet GPI link, and that's because it doesn't in itself take any trigger. In fact, it has this box that will always run it, or it will depend on whether or not a given system flag has been set. Also, we have selected bank number 1 for storing the original routing, because we are going to override the routes when we operate it. And finally, we can also fix which grid it falls back to. But let's see how this works. So what we have seen is the controller element hosting the auto router action. We have seen all the inputs configured to put camera numbers into the memory group and remove them again when the trigger is removed. So now we can go to the software, the BlackMagic Multiview setup, which is currently connected to a Multiview16, and the BlackMagic Video Hub control. So I'm not able to show you actually the Multiviewer's SDI output, unfortunately, but if you know the product, you will know that this reflects whatever the Multiviewer does. So we'll need to approach it in this way. So let's say this is the default. We have a configuration with a 4x4 grid, and all sources 1 through 16 are routed directly to views 1 through 16. And I will now trigger some of the input pins on my Ethernet GPI link. So let's trigger the first one. What we will see is that solo mode is enabled. Now, unfortunately, in this interface, you cannot see that it is, in fact, source number 1 that is routed to solo. You can only see that solo lights up here. But take my word for it. So I press trigger 2, and solo mode is enabled, and source 2 is routed to the solo output, and so forth. Now, you can see every time I release the trigger, I'm pushing the trigger, so I'm holding the trigger, I'm releasing it again, it will fall back to the grid view. See, the real magic happens when I hold down multiple triggers. So now I will hold down trigger number 3, and then I'll hold down trigger number 4. And now look at what happened in the BlackMagic Video Hub control. You see source 3 and 4 are routed to view 1 and 2. And we have a 2x2 grid selected. And now as I remove these again, you'll see that it all falls back to 4x4 and source 1 and 2 is restored here. So now I'll enable more triggers. So trigger 4, 3, 2, 5, and 6. And you can see how these sources are selected on the multiviewer, and when they are all held down at the same time. Let's see if I can make this happen. It's a little bit tricky for me with all these. Then we will see a 3x3 grid. Okay, it's a little bit tricky for me to get them all selected. There we go. We have now a 3x3 grid with all these sources selected at the same time. And when I release, it's all gonna fall back and the routings here are restored. The way the routings are restored is by using the preset bank we have for the multiviewer. So in the configuration, you can see we selected bank number 1 will be used to store values of the original routings.